So, I think we can all agree 2020's been pretty shit so far, hasn't it? But you know what's never shit? Some lovely, lovely Sega blue skies. And for my money, there's been no better game in recent memory that exemplifies this than Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing Transformed, a 2012 game released by Sega and developed by Sheffield-based gaming studio Sumo Digital, the same guys responsible for all the brilliant Outrun 2 ports. Sonic Transformed is a game that manages to squeeze more things Sega into a humble Blu-ray disc than your average Brighton peer in the 90s. God, that was a good time to be alive. So get your cart ready on the starting line, make sure your blowfish and fireworks are equipped, and join me now for my retro review of Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed was one of my favourite ever games of the 7th generation of consoles, the era of the PS3, Xbox 360 and Wii U. And I've been meaning for ages now to do a retrospective review of it. Now, one of the curious things about just how much I love this game, and something you might be surprised to find out, considering how Sega-centric my YouTube channel is, I'm not a fan of Sonic the Hedgehog. Now, before you all grab your torches and pitchforks and start spamming the dislike button, let me just clarify that statement. I don't mean that I dislike Sonic, I just mean that I'm indifferent when it comes to more or less the majority of all the Sonic games that have been released after the Mega Drive ones. I neither like or dislike the character. Sonic games are just something that don't normally register on my gaming radar. Sure, the first Sonic game on the Mega Drive will always hold a bit of a special place in my memory. As a hardcore Sega fanboy back then, I couldn't wait for Sega to unleash this new mascot of theirs that was being hyped as a better looking, faster version of Mario. When Sonic 1 very first came out, I was awed by its combination of amazing graphics, speed and sound, and how well Sonic himself controlled. In fact, just in obtaining the bit of video capture you can see in the background now, hearing some of the tunes from the first game for the first time in probably well over 20 years actually felt quite nostalgic and a little bit strangely emotive. When Sonic 2 came out, I thought it was even better than the first game, especially with its added 2-player mode and exceptionally impressive 3D bonus stages. But by the time I got to the end of it and cleared the final stage and boss, a bit of Sonic fatigue had begun to set in for me. By the time the third game was released, I had little interest in it, giving it a rental and a playthrough one weekend, quite a while after it had been released, and not regretting my decision to not purchase it. I bypassed Sonic and Knuckles altogether. After that, I never bothered with any of the subsequent Sonic games, with the one big exception to this being one of Sonic's first ever spin-off racing games, Sonic R on the Saturn. FYI, fat fans, Sonic Drift on the Game Gear held the honour of being the actual very first Sonic racer. I was a big fan of Sonic R, in particular its absolutely stonkingly awesome soundtrack by British composer Richard Jacks from Sega Europe. And to this day, whilst it might not be the best handling Saturn game of all time, I still think it's one of the best looking, with some particularly smooth, nice and chunky pop-up free visuals. So, as I said at the start of the video, it's not that I dislike Sonic, it's just that I've never had much interest in the Sonic games. My love of all things Sega predates the arrival of the Blue Spiky one, and stems from my love of all their incredible arcade titles from the mid to late 80s through to the early noughties. When I think of Sega, I don't instantly associate it with Sonic. I think of games like Shinobi, Golden Axe, Afterburner, Outrun, Daytona USA, House of the Dead, Crazy Taxi, and Panzer Dragoon. Now, if only there were a game that combined all of these classic Sega titles into one nice neat package. Now, before we get on to Transformed, a quick word about the first game in the series. Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing had managed to pretty much slip entirely under my radar when it very first came out. When a demo of the game first became available for the PS3, all the way back in 2010, being the big racing game fan that I am, I gave it a download. My initial impressions weren't great though. Despite being produced by the mighty Sumo Digital, who were responsible for the awesome ports of Outrun 2 on the PC and home consoles, Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing only ran at 30 frames per second. I thought this was particularly disappointing, given that Mario Kart Wii was able to manage 60 frames per second on less powerful hardware, and Sumo themselves had managed to keep all their ports of Outrun 2 and Coast to Coast, with the exception of the PSP version, locked at 60 frames per second on the previous generation of consoles. On top of this, the all-star roster of characters in the demo weren't based on any Sega IPs I was especially interested in. Sorry Virtua Fighter and Shenmue fans. And the playable track, based on Sega's Billy Hatcher, seemed rather flat and nondescript to me. I really didn't like the music either. Based on my impressions of the demo, I never bothered with the full release back then. So as I had no interest in the first game back in the day, when news of a sequel broke, again it didn't really register on my radar. Until, that is, I saw a screenshot from the game whilst it was still in development that literally made me go holy shit and almost fall out of my chair. A screenshot that looked just like the one I'm putting up on screen now, that showed the Hornet from Daytona USA power sliding across an aircraft carrier on an Afterburner theme level. Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed pretty much became a day one purchase for me after that, based on that one image alone. I was already sold on the game just from the idea of the iconic Daytona USA car being in there and an Afterburner track to play it on. So when a demo of the game dropped on PlayStation 3, I was super chuffed to find out that it included not only one, but two playable tracks based on two other Sega IPs I absolutely loved, Panzer Dragoon and Golden Axe.
One, go! Transform boost! Ice! Holding the race!
When I found out that a DLC track based on an Outrun theme would be available as a free pre-order bonus, this just made me want the game as a day one purchase even more. When the full game was released, it contained stages, music and characters not only from the Sega games I've already mentioned, but also Shinobi, Knights, Burning Rangers and Skies of Arcadia, as well as returning IPs from the first game, including House of the Dead, Crazy Taxi, Super Monkey Ball, Jet Set Radio, Samba de Amigo, Space Channel 5, Alex Kidd and Billy Hatcher. Real-life NASCAR driver Danica Patrick also guest-starred, as well as lovable Disney anti-hero Wreck-It Ralph. Mega Drive platform character Ristar makes an appearance in the game as well as a flagman. Some of the other stages, especially the final one, also featured a few other nods to Sega games of old, with the remix of the main Space Harrier theme being used as that stage's soundtrack. that sounds very reminiscent to me of the main background music of the cancelled PC Engine CD-ROM game Space Fantasy Zone. One of the biggest differences though between this game and the first one was the introduction of the transformed mechanic. The levels in the game were broken up between land, air and water-based sections, and the transform mechanic meant that your chosen character's vehicle was able to adapt to these by morphing between 3 different modes: a car, a boat or an aircraft. A very nice touch in the game is that some of the levels change from lap to lap, with parts of the track either getting destroyed or changed in other ways as the race progresses, turning a previously land-based part of the track into a waterway or a section that now needs to be traversed by the air. In the Burning Ranges course, for example, the stage is continually flooding, meaning each of the 3 laps is different. In the Golden Axe stage, parts of the track gradually get destroyed by chunks of debris, destroying the roadways, forcing you to take to the air. In the Panzer Dragoon track, the roadway gets destroyed on the 3rd lap by one of the familiar looking giant millipede type enemies from Panzer Dragoons Y. It's a great idea and means that the courses are full of uneven terrain and choppy water that affect your kart's handling, whilst presenting lots of opportunities to earn speed boosts from carefully timed tricks and transformations as a result of being flung into the air from a big wave or a jump. As well as the dynamic changes occurring within the stage themselves, there are other nice little touches, which you tend to observe if you manage to make it in front of the pack and hold on to pole position, like being able to fly behind the iconic blue dragon as it takes to the air on the Panzer Dragoon level. All of these things combined made the racing mechanics in Transformed seem more exciting and dynamic than the first game, based on my limited experience with that game's demo. Unfortunately, on my PS3 at any rate, the game was still only 30 frames per second, but I will give Sumo a bit of a get out of jail free card here, as I believe the water-based sections of the levels meant that this game was more graphically intensive than the first one. The PS3 version runs at a native 720p, and the stages in the game are vast and luscious looking, popping with lots of colour, detail and variety. They're filled with homages to the Sonic and Sega games they're based on, and the impressive size of the tracks leads to some fairly lengthy races. The dynamic water effect is equally very impressive, with unpredictable waves and rough waters battering your craft as you race across it. The characters themselves and their vehicles are also equally bold, colourful, well lit and animated. The game is also very nicely presented, with large 3D models of the various game modes appearing on the title screen and menus. On the downside though, going back and playing through my PS3 version of the game now, specifically for this video, it's noticeable that the frame rate does suffer quite a bit at times, becoming noticeably chuggy in busy sections of the track, seemingly dropping, to my naked eye at any rate, to well below 30 frames per second. I think this is especially noticeable to me now in the PS3 game, as I've subsequently upgraded to the PC version. The PC port of Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed came out several months after the release of the console games and was visually enhanced over all the console versions. All the footage I've used in the video so far has been captured from my PS3, but I am now going to swap to the PC game. The PC game ran at 60 frames per second, hurrah! And was now also notably playable in 1080p. On top of improved visuals, the PC version of the game also received 3 brand new characters originating from the Sega games Shogun 2 and Football Manager, and weirdly the Valve game Team Fortress. Ryu Hazuki from Shenmue also made a reappearance as a later DLC character for Steam, with further Sega homage duty going on, with his car, flying and boat based modes being based on the deluxe versions of an Outrun, Space Harrier and Hang-On cabinet respectively. It's amazing just how much better Sonic Transformed looks like this on PC. I think I noticed the difference even more as I was obtaining capture for this video, as I went directly from playing my old PS3 version to the PC one. Despite the less impressive frame rate and lower res visuals on the PS3 though, I can honestly say, hand on heart, that this did not in any way hamper my enjoyment of the game back in the day. And fun this game certainly is. All the old school Sega fan service would be for nothing if the gameplay wasn't up to scratch. But I'm pleased to say that it certainly doesn't disappoint in this respect. With the 3 different vehicle types all handling well and feeling very responsive. With, as you'd expect from a karting game, the main emphasis being on drifting. A simple press of the left shoulder button on your joypad initiates a drift, which rewards you with a speed boost if you manage to maintain it for a short period of time. The longer you keep the drift going for, the greater your speed boost goes up, charging up to a maximum of 3 levels. If you encounter any tricky S-bends, quickly releasing and repressing the left shoulder button whilst changing the direction you're steering in will make you quickly change direction, allowing you to maintain your drift through the corner and keep charging it up. Whilst in aircraft mode, players can air drift around corners to earn boost and can also perform rolls to quickly adjust their position and earn boost for narrowly dodging obstacles. Your kart and boat forms can also earn boost by performing stunts when you drive over jumps or big waves. You can roll left and right and flip forwards or backwards with a press of the right stick. The more rolls and flips you do, the more kudos the game heaps upon you and the greater the boost you earn. As a kart-based racer, weapons obviously feature heavily. These are picked up on the track as you race and include things like freezing snowballs, blowfish, fireworks, explosive homing RC cars, an explosive hot rod engine and a swarm of giant wasps that when activated appear at the front of the pack and block the track. The swarm is very much this game's equivalent of Mario Kart's blue shell. There's also a speed boost ability and a glove that can be deployed tactically to capture enemy projectiles that are being fired at you, which then adds those projectiles to your inventory. Firing it straight back at the character who just fired it at you is particularly satisfying. Projectile weapons can be fired both forwards and backwards and used to counter other players' projectiles, adding an element of tactical play to proceedings. Super pickups are also available, normally granting you multiple uses of a weapon. The ultimate pickup is the All-Star, morphing your craft into an invincible form that is faster and impervious to damage and crashes, with each racer having their own individual All-Star theme to boot. Groovy.
All-Star! First place!
Star tokens can be found scattered across the courses or earned by attacking opponents, which can be spent in a slot machine between races to earn random bonuses such as enhanced items or faster recovery from certain weapons. Whilst you can take part in individual races in a GP mode, the main bulk of the gameplay takes part around a World Tour mode. This mode involves going through a branching series of events that incorporate other types of gameplay other than races, similar to the mission modes in Sega and Sumo's other famous arcade racer, Outrun 2. These include challenges such as Traffic Attack, Sprint Race, Battle Race, Ring Race, Boost and Drift challenges, and a battle against a tank boss as well.
Super Glove! Hot Rod! Hot Rod! Fail! Triple flip! Okay. Checkpoint. 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 Checkpoint.
Some of the challenges are playable in a mirror mode.
Ammo. 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 Ammo.
As you progress through the world tour and complete these various modes, you earn stars, and reaching a certain threshold of stars allows you to unlock the extra characters in the game. You earn more stars for completing the challenges on harder difficulties, and as you progress through the game, you'll need to do at least some of these challenges on the hardest difficulty level to unlock everyone. And typically, the Hornet from Daytona, the character known as Aegis in this, and the one I most wanted, was the very last one you got to unlock. Ugh. Additionally, playing through these modes allows you to both level up your characters and also unlock mods that change the handling of your character's vehicle, allowing you to put a higher emphasis on things like boost, top speed, acceleration or handling. All these modes can be played in either single player or split screen multiplayer, with a maximum of 4 local players, meaning you can still earn stars whilst playing with your friends. The game also supported online multiplayer. Sonic and All-Stars Transformed also boasted an absolutely fantastic soundtrack, with Sega music maestro Richard Jacks on audio duty, returning once again to the world of Sonic. Transformed features some excellent remixed versions of the music from the various older Sega games that are featured. I mentioned earlier in the video that the Billy Hatcher music in the demo for the first game did absolutely nothing for me. We'll have a quick listen to it now in comparison to the Billy Hatcher theme from Transformed, and I'm sure you'll see the difference in quality yourself, or hear rather. Now compare this to the transformed version. Alright, maybe I'm being a bit biased here, as I am a massive drum and bass fan, and of course music is a very subjective matter. But I just thought that first version of the Billy Hatcher tune sounded a bit mournful and dirge-like. I think all the tunes in Sonic Transformed are absolutely ace though, and I even don't mind some of the more dubsteppy sounding ones, a genre which I'm generally not the biggest fan of. Burning Depths, the background music for the Burning Rangers stage, is a particular favourite of mine, and one I've often found myself listening to just on its own.
Save lives.
God damn, that's a slice of funk awesome sauce there. I bloody love it. And in fact, I love all the music to this game. The music to the specific Sonic stages are excellent too, with Mr. Jax managing to sneak in some references to his own previous work on the Sonic R soundtrack back from the Saturn days. Now, as much as I love playing the game, I must admit that one area I wasn't really so fond of was how annoying the CPU players could get sometimes. I think this is just something that's endemic to weapons-based races as a whole, but there were times when it really felt like all the CPU players were ganging up on me, rather than it being a free-for-all. I'd be in 4th place trying to get to the front of the pack, not only trying to fend off the attacks of all the CPU players behind me, but the 1st, 2nd and 3rd place wankers would all be shooting backwards at me too. Also, there's nothing more annoying than when you've got into 1st place and you're drifting through several technically difficult challenging corners like a boss, and then you get shot from behind and come to an almost complete stop, drop down to 4th place, and as you just start to pick up speed again, another CPU opponent will shoot you, grinding you to a standstill once again, almost as a big ha ha fuck you loser to the player from the game, and before you know it you're in last place. Then, as you're trying to make those places back up again, you'll find that the CPUs will just keep shooting backwards at you, keeping you trapped at the back of the pack. On the flip side of this though, the game will do a nice job of stroking your ego when you're doing particularly well, letting you know when you're dominating a race and heaping praise on you when you've managed to chain together an especially impressive number of flips and rolls into a stunt. If you manage to dominate a race for long enough, the game will actually start chanting your character's name.
Blowfish!
As a very superficial and easily pleased person, I love it when that happens. Now, when I was complaining about the CPUs there, I was really painting a picture of when they are behaving at their most egregious. In fairness, this isn't generally an issue on the easy and normal difficulty levels, and despite what I've said about feeling specifically singled out by the CPUs, they do actually attack each other as well. But in order to get those final couple of stars to take your total number up to the required amount to unlock ages, you do need to play through several of the challenges in the World Tour on hard and expert level. And it did start to get a little bit frustrating at times. Despite my moaning here about the difficulty, in all honesty it wasn't impossible, and I did manage to unlock ages within about 5 days of getting the PS3 game. Although admittedly I was playing it pretty much non-stop as soon as I got home from work during those 5 days. Winning the expert races for me pretty much involved continuously playing until I'd get an all-star, and then activating it in the very last leg of the 3rd lap, allowing me to fly past the lead racers, whilst adding in a little ha ha fuck you all of my own in as I soared past them. Fortunately, when I upgraded to the PC version, I was able to simply use someone else's save data I downloaded off the internet. Having gone through unlocking ages once on the PS3, I really didn't feel the need to do it all over again. Obviously, it goes without saying, as a big Sega arcade racing fan, that out of all the awesome Sega characters featured in the game, such as Gilius Thunderhead from Golden Axe, Joe Musashi from Shinobi, Knights and Alex Kidd, Ages is by far my favourite, with not only its land-based mode being based on the Hornet from Daytona USA, but its flying mode morphing into an F-14 from Afterburner, and its aquatic form turning into a very Hydro Thunder-esque powerboat that looks like a Dreamcast controller. That was such an awesome touch of Sumo Digitals to add that in. So anyway, this is how a non-Sonic the Hedgehog loving person such as myself came to love a Sonic karting game. I'm pretty sure that the game's lead director at Sumo Digital, Steve Lysett, is around a similar age to myself, and the game definitely feels like it's been made by a team that are just as much fans of Sega's old school arcade heritage as I am, and the tracks built in memory of all the old Sega IPs are just such a fantastic addition. Just racing through them, seeing all the nods to Sega's legacy, listening to the brilliant remixes of these classic old Sega tunes, has had me beaming away from ear to ear more times than I care to mention. And, just as I've been narrating the video, seeing all the footage playing in the background has reminded me of just what a truly gobsmackingly beautiful game this is. The tracks are so detailed and varied. Transformed truly is an absolutely fantastic game, and if you missed out on a copy of it when it was very first released, I cannot recommend strongly enough that you pick yourself up a copy now as soon as possible. One of the other incidental benefits of me enjoying Transformed so much is that it retrospectively piqued my interest in the first game and made me decide to give it a second chance. I picked up a second-hand copy for cheap on the Xbox 360 a few years ago, and I'm pleased to say that I have found it highly enjoyable. I was also pleased to discover subsequently that it actually did have some unlockable characters from Sega games I cared about, like Alex Kidd, Opa Opa from Fantasy Zone, Beady Joe from Crazy Taxi, and the Bonanza Brothers, as well as some House of the Dead themed stages as well. It seems curious to me that whoever was in charge of releasing the demo, whether it was Sega or Sumo themselves, decided to go with the Billy Hatcher track, as it's probably one of the visually least interesting and generic looking to my eye. If they'd gone for something like this one, the Ocean View track, with its incredible looking transparent underwater tunnel, this game probably would have been a day one purchase for me. Also, despite my previous slagging off of the music based on what I'd experienced in the demo, there actually are some very good tunes in there, particularly, oddly enough, some of the menu music. I was also very happy to discover that some of the Sonic R tunes even make a comeback in it. Out of the two games though, Transformed is still by far my favourite. Beyond the obvious draw of the nostalgia factor of the second game, compared to Transformed, the first game's driving mechanics feel a bit simplistic, with a lot of the tracks somehow just feeling a bit flatter and less dynamic. The drifting in Transformed feels a bit more polished and tighter to me as well, along with the power-ups and weaponry feeling a bit more interesting. Transformed has 4 tracks lifted directly from the first game, and comparing the two games head to head, it's interesting to see that in some places the first game is actually more graphically advanced than Transformed, such as the transparent track on the Carnival Town Samba de Amigo stage. It also appears that the first game runs a bit faster than the second, with Transform lagging behind its older relative and played head to head. One last thing that's just worth mentioning about Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing as well, is that in an unusual move, in 2015, the game was ported from home systems into the arcade, running on Sega's ring-wide arcade board. I say unusual because traditionally these things normally happen the other way round. Well, let's wrap things up there and draw things to a... What's that? Am I going to talk about Team Sonic Racing, the current generation follow-on game? Well, no, not really. Oh, sort of a little bit, okay. The thing is, Team Sonic Racing doesn't have any Sega characters in it that aren't related to Sonic the Hedgehog. You see, sadly, the team at Sumo Digital that were responsible for the new game's development decided, in their infinite wisdom, to drop the Sega All-Star part in this game to focus on the adventure mode instead. Studio Design Director for Team Sonic, Derek Littlewood, explained,
"The reason we dropped non-Sonic Universe characters was so we could dive into the Sonic Universe in more depth and tell a canon Sonic Universe story with our Team Adventure mode. That was very important for us."
Team Sonic racing designer Ben Wilson explained how this made character exchanges a lot easier.
Because this game's set in a universe with characters who have a relationship already, it let us do a dialogue system where they're on a track and they're yelling at each other, and they have familiarity with each other and make references to history, which we wouldn't have been able to do really, had other franchise characters been present, or at least not in as smooth a way. So it let us do some additional stuff as well.
Oh, Derek, Ben, these sound like terrible reasons for not allowing me to play as the Hornet from Daytona, USA again. or racing on tracks inspired by Shinobi and Golden Axe. Are you seriously telling me there's no possible way you could have made a cross-franchise adventure mode work? I mean, isn't this the exact same thing that the Kingdom Hearts games have been doing for God knows however many years now? Why does a racing game even need an adventure mode for chuff's sake? Maybe I'm cutting off my nose to spite my face here by not even giving the game a chance, and some of you may well be getting a sense of deja vu here, as I'd similarly dismissed the first game out of hand originally. And in truth, I love the Sonic themed stages in Transform just as much as the Sega Heritage ones. In fact, the Galactic Parade one is one of the best looking stages in the entire game in my opinion. The effect when the spaceship in the distance here zooms in, and the track goes into it and you realise just how gargantuan it is, never ceases to impress me. But by completely dropping all the Sega All-Star characters and concentrating entirely on Sonic and his band of chums, you have effectively made me lose all interest in Team Sonic. Whilst you could argue that the inclusion of all the tracks and characters that pay tribute to the Sega games of old and Transformed are a purely superficial detail and the gameplay is what's all important, I'd go so far as to argue that it's the inclusion of these things that very much help make the gameplay what it is. As each level isn't just some generic Sonic theme, it's an interactive trip into Sega's past. The level variety is what has added so much to Transformed's replayability for me, and why I'm still coming back to it now, 8 years after it was first released. By stripping out the Sega All-Star part, all you're left with then is a generic karting game. In their gaming review section, UK free newspaper Metro picked up on this as well. Here's what they had to say. The level design suffers, as while each one is inspired by elements of famous Sonic games and stages, too much of it is just generic roadways or biomes that would appear in any game no matter the branding, from snow to desert. Mario Kart's Grand Prix races may be unimaginatively structured, but at least you know you're getting 4 different courses in each one. In Team Sonic Racing they quickly start repeating, and you're left trying to remember whether this is a new one or one you've seen before. This is all a particular shame because the previous 2 games had stages based around other Sega franchises, which made them all seem much more distinctive. That goes for the characters as well, not to mention the transforming kart gimmick from Transformed. Apart from the driving itself, Team Sonic Racing is a backward step in almost every regard, and all for no obvious gain, other than presumably little kids don't know what Golden Axe or Shenmue are. Team Sonic Racing is not only a poor man's Mario Kart, it's a poor man's Sonic and All-Star racing game. That doesn't mean that you can't still have fun with it, and there are some interesting new ideas, but in the race to win gamers' hearts, this struggles to even get on the podium. I'll add a link to the full Metro review in the description, along with the Nintendo Life article that I quoted from earlier. Anyway, I don't want to end the video on a sour note by putting the boot into Team Sonic Racing. It just feels to me like dropping the Sega All-Stars part was, as Metro said, a backward step for no obvious gain. It feels like a missed opportunity as well when you consider that there are still so many things that they could do with the old Sega IPs out there. Imagine a Transform sequel that had a Daytona USA theme level, made up of parts of 37 Speedway, Dinosaur Canyon and Seaside Street Galaxy. What about a playable Super Hang-On bike? Or the ship from Galaxy Force? Or the chopper from Thunderblade? What about a Virtua Racing theme level made up of untextured polygons? A Fantasy Zone one with the return of Opa Opa? What about some Streets of Rage love? Or a Sega Rally or Scud Race tribute? There are literally so many possibilities. Maybe I'm the one living in a fantasy zone, by thinking that Sega even cares about whether someone who's over 40 even figures into their target demographic for a Sonic karting game. I probably will pick up Team Sonic eventually, and on the plus side I hear that it is 60 frames per second. But considering that we're now on next generation hardware compared to Transform's initial console outing, I think that 60 frames per second should come as a standard. Okay, so this genuinely is the end of my Sonic and Sega All-Star Transformed retro review. As I said before, if you missed out on this game when it was first released, especially if you're an old school Sega fan like myself, do yourself a favour and track down a copy now. I guarantee you won't regret it. It is one of my favourite games of the last 10 years. If you are familiar with the game, then I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down memory lane with me, and that likewise you were able to get as much enjoyment out of Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed as I have. Mr. Steve Lysett, hats off to you, sir. You managed to make an old Sega fan very happy. Take care everyone, and catch you again soon.